have to change the supply. There isn't enough vaccine. There aren't enough syringes. And we're gonna feel a difference as the Defense Production, the Defense Production Act gets up there. But it's a real problem that we don't have enough, both vaccine and some of the things needed to do the vaccine. So we'll get there. And if you can't get the vaccine, you just have to live the way we've been living, which is with safety first. And honestly, if you get the vaccine, you have to live masked, social distancing. This is not a magic bullet that life goes back to January of 2020. So we just have to really calm down in terms of what we can achieve. And it's scary. Of course, it's very scary. And we don't even know what this vaccine, but Regina Linder and Nate Goldstein are going to tell us on February 22nd more about that. Marilyn Michon is volunteering to help Florida folks.
Great. It's time.
Okay. It is 10 o'clock.
It is. So we have a special mystery guest who will be coming on soon. But before that, Ira, you have a little teaching and some beautiful music for us, do you not?
I do indeed. Very little teaching, mostly music. We're going to be listening to two psalms by Arvo Pärt, and I just put his name in the chat because most people mispronounce it and say Arvo Pärt, but it's pronounced Pärt. He's Estonian. He was born in 1935, and he's still quite alive, and one of the most interesting composers, I would say, of contemporary times. He started out writing music that was sort of very typical in the early, the early part of the 20th century, experimenting with 12-tone and other electronic stuff. Not my phone. But in the late 60s, he sort of had a crisis, both personal and also was partially censored by the Soviets, and his music started to disappear from concert halls. So he took some time off and immersed himself in studying medieval and Renaissance music, which you can definitely hear the influence of in his later works. He also, in the early 70s, converted from Lutheranism to Orthodox Christianity. And since the 1970s, his style is sometimes called mystical minimalism. It's very highly inspired by Gregorian chant and medieval melodic techniques. And he has a very strong affinity for the mystics and the saints of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So onto the two psalms we're going to hear today are a group that he paired together called Zwei Slavische Psalmen. And what's really interesting about these psalms is that they're written in a language that's very unusual. They're written in the Church Slavonic language, and which Wikipedia describes as being the conservative Slavic liturgical language that's used by the Orthodox Church in Bulgaria, Russia, Belarus, and other places, etc. The two psalms are actually Psalm 117 and 131, which happen to be the two shortest psalms in the whole book of Psalms. 117 is 2 verses, and 131 is 3 verses. So I don't know if that was maybe one of the reasons Pärt chose these psalms, but the settings are very, very beautiful. And since there's only one person in this whole class who could read the text for us of these psalms in their original Church Slavonic language, I asked Darina if she would consider reading the text for us, and she graciously agreed. So I thank you, Darina, and will you please read Psalm 117 for us, and we'll read the text for Psalm 131 at the end of class before we listen to it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, 60. 117. Окей. Хвалите Господа все языци, похвалите Его все люди, яко утвердися милост Его на нас, и истина Господня пребывает вовек.
Wow, thank you. All right, so we will go to the recording.
Yes, please.
All right. Whoops, let me make sure that I have it optimized.
Oh, and I will say one more thing before you play the recording. Listen for sort of toward the end, you can hear the words hallelujah, and then the mood of the psalm will change. And that's because he goes into the doxology, which is often said at the end of Psalms in many different churches. We heard it in an Anglican version of a psalm I played early on, and that's sort of like the Chatima as Harold described it.
All right.
That's not the end, Harold.
I know. I think we need to get started with class and we will post this, okay?
Okay.
We have a lot on the schedule for today. It is gorgeous and I love Parrot and I encourage everyone to go back and listen to it when we post.
Thank you so much, Darina and Ira. Thank you so much. So we have a special class today. And as I said, I won't be here tomorrow because it's Ben Dime, our former cantor, our former rabbinical intern's senior sermon. So tomorrow will be Chavruta study. For those who want to join, I think we posted the link for the tefillah at HUC and then his sermon. But today, instead of just starting with Psalm 17, which I'm not sure we might get to a little bit today, we have a very special class. I've invited our very own Rabbi Mike Moskowitz to join us today to be in discussion with me about this question of what pardes means. And I think Rabbi Moskowitz is here. So if you could just speak so we see where you are, Rabbi Moskowitz.
Yes, I'm right here.
Great, welcome. So a few words before we begin, and I'm going to ask, and I've asked Rabbi Moskowitz, I told him that I explained in the most pshat way what pardes stands for, and I got asked great questions by the class. but I don't have the knowledge to be able to answer them on a deeper level. So I've invited Rabbi Moskowitz to go into it. And a few words about Rabbi Moskowitz. Some of you know him well, and every morning at 8:30, he does a 15-minute shiur lesson on a book that's a very essential book of study about living an ethical life and living a life of meaning and purpose. And he goes through the text much like we're doing with Psalms, but in a 15-minute shiur, a lecture that you can get it every morning except for Shabbat morning at 8:30 on CBSC's Facebook page. And then I'm usually busy at 8:30, so I don't usually get it live, but like me, you could listen to it all day long. And it's a very important part of my day. And I encourage everybody, and I know many in the Psalms class are doing that as a regular part of your morning. Marcia Melnick has told me she starts with a cup of coffee and listening to Rabbi Moskowitz teach those 15 minutes. It's really, really brilliant. Now, a few other words before I ask Rabbi Moskowitz to go into Pardes, to go into the orchard with us, just so that everyone understands that Rabbi Moskowitz is a Haredi trained rabbi. He has 3 smichas, 3 ordinations from Haredi institutions. Haredi means somebody who is from an ultra-Orthodox background or training, which is different than Hasidic. So ultra-Orthodox could be Hasidic or yeshivish. Yeshivish means from the tradition that comes, and I'm doing this in extreme superficial generalization, and Rabbi Moskowitz can correct me. The Vilna Gaon, who is the great genius of Vilna, his student started a system of yeshiva studying in Volozhin, which is now I think it's considered part of Belarus. I'm not sure exactly where it is now. Volozhin was the greatest yeshiva in Eastern Europe. It set the stage, created the model for yeshiva study. And that was in the early 1800s. So it's a relatively modern concept, the way yeshivas are organized. It doesn't go back to the Talmud, even though what they're studying is the Talmud. But what we think of as yeshiva study, with the way it's structured. And the Volozhin Yeshiva was famous for being open, studying 24 hours a day. And yeshiva study is what I'm introducing in just a little tiny bit. You would never go to a shiur of a rabbi, and I'm sure Rabbi Moskowitz will tell you in his training, in his yeshivas, you would never show up without having already studied the text in yeshiva. The point is the student studies in chavruta for hours and hours and hours. And then the rabbi would come in to teach and assume the students already had been studying. It's very different than kind of an American college structure where the professor gives a lecture and then the students might go into a TA'd seminar. That's a very superficial description of it. But the Volozhin Yeshiva, by the way, really important to know if you want to know anything about Jewish life in the world. And it's kind of terribly sad that most liberal Jews would not even recognize the word Volozhin. The Volozhin Yeshiva is so important. And it existed to different degrees until World War II, when the Nazis used it for a stable and housed cows and horses in the yeshiva building. But the building itself survived, which is kind of miraculous. And after the Iron Curtain went down, the building's been fixed
Restored?
up. What?
Restored?
Restored somewhat. The most important thing is really not the building, although it's now considered a very important place, is the system of learning and the intellectual level of learning that it represents. Volozhin was like the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford put all together, and it created students and cultures that influence the Jewish world to this day. That is not Hasidic. It's completely different than Hasidism. And for non-Orthodox Jews, Jews sometimes kind of see people who dress the way that Rabbi Moskowitz dresses, for instance, and thinks it's all the same. It's really, 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 really different. And the Hasidism of Eastern Europe by and large, was not an intellectual tradition in the way that Volozhin and the yeshivish tradition was. And I'm not going to go into more of the differences, but I talked about it a little bit when I spoke about how for the Hasidic world, the Rebbe is the way to access God for many Hasidim. And that is not really, a Rebbe is very, very important. Your teacher is worshiped and revered, but it's not seen as the only way you can access God. That feeling of there being an intermediary, which in the Hasidic world, the Rebbe is really functions as an intermediary, and Rabbi Moskowitz is going to correct me, is not really, in the yeshivish world, that would be seen as a little bit avodah zarah. You know, nobody replaces God. Your teacher is access to learning, and there's nothing more important than your teacher. And in a yeshiva, I mean, even I went to a Soloveitchik high school yeshiva, which is in the line, but of this yeshiva world, but not. It's in the yeshivish line as opposed to the Hasidish line. And a student would not think of staying seated when their rabbi entered a room. Anytime your rabbi entered a room, you would stand. It would be inconceivable to me as a high school student to sit when my rabbi entered a room. That didn't mean I thought of the rabbi as the intermediary with God. That would be considered. I went to a very Soloveitchik yeshivish world, was very intellectual and anti the Hasidish stuff, but very much revered teachers and learning. Anybody who, in fact, that's why we say in Judaism, somebody who has students, it's as if they're their children because the relationship is so significant, and teachers. Anyway, CBST is very, 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 very lucky to have Rabbi Moskowitz. I know basically a thumbnail amount of Jewish knowledge compared to what Rabbi Moskowitz knows. It's amazing for us in a non-Orthodox world to have somebody who is a scholar at the level of Rabbi Moskowitz. A thumbnail might be even an exaggeration. So for me to have him in our community is an incredible honor for me personally. And I know enough to know that the scholarship he represents elevates all of us and gives our community a real foundation for which I'm deeply, deeply, deeply grateful. There is not another non-Orthodox synagogue in the world who has somebody at the level of Rabbi Moskowitz. There are very few Orthodox synagogues in the world who have somebody at the level of the scholarship of Rabbi Moskowitz. He is a rare scholar of Jewish text. So, all that being said, there's a lot of information about the yeshivish world versus the Hasidish world. And by the way, within the Hasidish world, they don't get along. This is the idea that it's all the same so I've invited Rabbi Moskowitz, to whom I turn whenever I don't know something, which is I don't know a lot. But I was asked great questions, Rabbi Moskowitz, when I introduced the class to the concept of the 4 levels of studying Jewish text. And so question is his background yeshivish or Hasidish? It's yeshivish, definitely. Rabbi Moskowitz is definitely yeshivish, not Hasidish. And he comes from Rabbi Moskowitz, why don't you describe the Mir Yeshiva a little bit? So this is an unusual opportunity.
First of all, thank you for the exceedingly generous introduction. I feel like everyone's going to be disappointed because now they have expectations greater than I am. But I'm so grateful for CBST and for Rabbi Kleinbaum in particular for making this possible, and for those who support this work. And I feel really, really lucky, and I'm very happy to be here this morning to share some of this, my own experience. The Mir is the world's largest yeshiva. There are around 10,000 men post-high school. It came from the Mir in Poland during World War II. It escaped through Shanghai. There are phenomenal books that detail the hundreds of students that went from the Mir to Shanghai. And some of the struggles there. It's near the international date line. They would keep 2 days of Yom Kippur. There are all sorts of really interesting stories, but it's learning for learning. If we think about Judaism as being in relationship with God, which is not the only way to see Judaism, but If you do, so then the Torah contains the details of that relationship. So if a person sees love as, if it's important to you, it's important to me, the more that we learn Torah, the more that we can understand what's important to God. And as a result, we can come closer. And so really learning is important because it brings to action, but learning is important because it's the way in which God communicates to us. Prayer is us communicating to God, but the Torah is God's way of communicating to us. So there's nothing that's more important. It is a Torah-centric community, the Mir, and Torah free from personal refinement can never be Torah, because God is humble. And if we want to hear the way in which it's being spoken, so then we need to be on a similar wavelength. So the Mir is part of this Lithuanian track that also, because of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, emphasizes Musar as like the Derech Eretz. The Derech Eretz we translate as like, I don't know, Rabbi, you want to help translate?
Yeah, sure. I'm Rabbi Moskowitz's whisper translator, like the anger translator of Obama. Derech is the way to live, an ethical way to live a life.
Right. So being a mensch, being a good human, is a prerequisite for Torah. And so unlike some of the other movements, Musar is very much the culture. It's about self-control. It's about advancing one's own limits. How long can you learn without being interrupted? What happens when you have thoughts that might interrupt? Can you be in control of them? So it's a very cerebral space, both in terms of character development. It's not a warm, fuzzy place. It's a hyper-intellectual, cerebral, elitist place where the more you know, the more valuable your presence is. And as a result, and this is itself a fascinating worldview, that entire world is created for the most exceptional among the exceptional. Meaning, from a time that a child can read, they are taught Torah, as if they have the potential to be the next leader of the generation. After 14 years of schooling and then many years of Beis Medrash, people come to realize that that is perhaps not the path that they're going to be on. But nevertheless, the entire system is catered to see who will be the best of the best. And so everybody is kind of given that training. And then, by the time you're in your mid-20s, the geniuses have kind of, risen to the top, and they start marrying into other families of great Talmudic scholars. And that's how that world kind of centers the learning as the most important thing a person can do in this world, and the way in which people are chosen for greatness is to the extent that they're able to memorize things and to study.
And so this is a very important distinction to the Hasidic world, where the leader of the community would be the son or the nephew or the son-in-law of the leader. So it became it's a family dynasty, and often, guess what? The children of a great leader are not necessarily going to be great leaders. And so there's been a lot of the corruption that exists in the Hasidic world has been because people are in positions of great power over many, many people with a lot of access to funds as well as other forms of corruption. Because guess what? That often happens in systems in which families give power to their children or their sons-in-law or nephews, as it were, if there isn't a male heir.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Moskowitz was in this yeshiva in Jerusalem, and okay, so that's and the yeshiva was open 24 hours a day, right?
It's 24 hours a day. Yeah, the Mir has some customs and some kind of what they call takanas, some kind of established rules, and one is that the front door does not have a lock. There was never meant to be a time where the yeshiva was closed. In Volozhin, right, Reb Chaim of Volozhin, the principal student of the Vilna Gaon, really understood very literally that the world rests on the learning of Torah. And so that's actually why they had different shifts. And that's why he explained why there were time zones. Because if there was a time where the world, there was not one person learning, the world would cease to exist as if it was never created. That's very much the theology. And so having, different time zones and having shifts of people learning through the night made it possible for the world to be sustained through learning. But so it's, when we talk about like the learning is the center of the universe, it's not hyperbolic, it's actually deeply literal in that if there wasn't learning, there wouldn't be a world.
So this is the system from Volozhin. Volozhin really created this system. That's why. So anyway, all right. Now, Rabbi Moskowitz, tell us about Pardes.
Sure. So if we think about, so just in the most simple place,
Do we need to repeat it? Do people remember this discussion? Should we put up, Harold, do you have those 4 words we could put up on the screen? Okay.
Okay, great, fantastic. So there's the pshat, the remez, the drosh, and the said. The easiest way, I think, to, so this has its source like kind of in scriptural places. You find it in Shirim, the Song of Songs, in the love poem. You find it in most overtly in the 2nd chapter of Chagiga. I believe it starts in like Yud Beis 12. But if you get into, a few pages into the chapter, you'll hear the story. The Mishnah talks about the 4 people who entered into the Pardes. 4 is an important number in a lot of places, but it speaks, like in the 4 sons, not to 4 distinct sons or children, but rather 4 different aspects that exist within each person. One of the ways in which we are different from God is that we are complicated. God is not complicated. In fact, one of the things that we know about God is that there's a simplicity of the unity of God. God is one. And what that means for us is that because we occupy physical and finite space, there's often a dominant expression of one thing to the exclusion of another. We're sitting in the chair that we're sitting in, or the couch, or we're standing, but God is everywhere all the time. And so the way in which language, sorry for New York City's noise, one of the things that we acknowledge is that language is limiting. Who are you is never going to be as expansive as the experiences and the unique life experiences that make us who we are. The Pardes is a framework by which a person is able to have a more holistic understanding of something which is not limited except for its presentation. So to try to say that a little bit differently, do you mind if we, can we, if people can see fine, I love seeing people's faces to make sure that we don't get too lost here. For example, we know that the 4 cups of wine during the Passover Seder are an allusion to the 4 languages of redemption. God took us out, God redeemed us, God freed, etc. There's an understanding that language itself was enslaved. And so part of the Passover experience is in the liberation of speech. Paroi is peh ra'ah. It's an evil mouth. Pesach is pesach. It's the mouth that speaks. Moses, after experiencing God, was orel sifasayim. He had blocked lips because if you experience the divine, words can't do that justice. It's one of the reasons why in counseling, and certainly in rabbinic counseling, we get people to talk about things because it lowers the emotional temperature. It was horrific. It was an atrocity. It was traumatic, right? It already has put it into words. So words limit. It's one of the big struggles in talking about gender identity and sexual orientation. I don't want to get too far into that but it's deeply related. We are all complicated. We all hold all sorts of things. Love is expansive. Love is love. And that is much more accurate a description than the ways in which the particular labels. So for example, on the night of Passover, the pshat of matzah is flour and water. When we think about vashteta, like what does it say? What is it? It's flour and water. You'll notice that the word for the Seder is 3 out of the 4 letters of the Pardes. There's the Soid, there's the Drasha, and the Remez. Seder means order. During the year, the truth is very much hidden. God is very much hidden. We forced God back into the closet. On the night of Passover, we bring a level of clarity of the reality of God as if we were there and experiencing it in present tense. We retell the story. All of the mitzvahs of the night of Passover involve the mouth. The telling over of the questions, the eating, the drinking, every aspect involves the mouth. And when we remove the pshat, when we remove the simple interpretation, what you see is what you get. It actually is kind of a portal into the deeper truth of the essence of something. So again, in the Pardes, if you spell it backwards, it's Samech Daled Reish is Seder, and there's no pshat. So the night of Passover is a reordering of a truthful expression of that which is always there without the limitation of the pshat. What that means, consequently, is that the matzah, being that it's not flour and water, can hold dual meanings that on a pshat level would be mutually exclusive. So the matzah is the bread of liberation and the bread of enslavement and poverty, right? Normally, it can't represent freedom and enslavement simultaneously. And it's not just the matzah, it's every single thing which is on the Passover Seder. The wine is red to remind us of the blood, but it's a libation, right? We dip in all sorts of accompaniments, but it's meant to be in salt water for the tears. The charoses is sweet, but it reminds us of the mortar. Every aspect holds the complexity in plain sight. And that is, on some level, the shift from the pshat into these deeper places. The deeper you go, the more you're able to transcend the limitations of the physical world and really be present in the spiritual, kind of the soid. The word soid means secret, but soid also means foundation, right? The Gemara says, nichnas yayin yotza soid. The wine comes in, the secrets come out. But what it also means, right, is that the foundation of who a person is, right? When a person doesn't have those inhibitions, when a person is not on their best behavior, when a person's essence, the face is the panim, right? Because it's the one part of the body where it expresses the internal emotions. It's the panim, it's the internal, right? Hands look the same, feet look the same, doesn't make a difference, you're happy, you're sad, right? But the face very much is a reflection of the inside. So the nichnas yayin yotza soid, the essence of who a person is, a person gets drunk and then you hear all sorts of horrific things. It's not pshat as those horrific things weren't there when they were sober. It's just they were able to control it. So when we think about being able to experience the divine free from the limitations of the physical world, the greater the insight of the text, the better the outlook and the more holistic the outlook of the divine. To such an extent, and then we'll go on to the next question, by the end of the Passover Seder, we've transcended even the limitations of the physical construction of time, right? The Chad Gadja is in the past tense. Then God came and slaughtered the angel of death, right? We've already invited Elijah the prophet in, who's the harbinger of this futuristic time where there is no obfuscation. When we think about evil, it's an absence of good, right? In terms of the divine, the word for the desecration of God's name is chilul Hashem. Chilul is a halal. It's a void. It's an absence. And so when we think about the presence of God, in that is the holiness, and the more that we are aware of it, the more that we can kind of interface with that holiness. So the Seder, the Pardes is actually, it's the portal in to get beneath the surface, to understand that which is concealed is really the biggest pshat. And I know that this is counterintuitive, but as you get into the Pardes, it doesn't lose the identity of what it is, which is actually the pshat. The pshat is the deepest level, that when you see the matzah, when you go through this process, the matzah is all of these things. It's not that it's no longer matzah. It's just that it's been so expansive in terms of what it really represents. And it's no different in getting to know people, right? A person is not all the things, but the person is all the things. All right, I know there was a lot of words, but I want to pause.
So somebody just wants to know, so just to go back a little bit, and that was fantastic, and I love the use of Pesach. Let's apply it to the use of studying a text, okay? Sure. So what I've described to people is that pshat is what we do when we first encounter the psalm, right? When we're just trying to figure out, well, what does the sentence mean? How does this Hebrew mean that? What does this word mean? So we start, but the image that I've offered you is that the word itself means orchard. Mm-hmm. A pardes is an orchard. And then each level we get to when we study text, we try to get to a deeper and a deeper level, just as Rabbi Moskowitz described. There's a pshat level, which is the simplest surface level. But as Rabbi Moskowitz said, of course, the surface level includes and embodies all the other levels, but the process of studying when you encounter a text for the first time is to understand you're going to go through a different process to go from very, very trying to understand kind of the pshat level. What does a word mean? But then what does a word mean gets us deeper and deeper. So they've asked what's the difference between remez and sod, since they both kind of mean secret, and he is a simple, as the pshat of the words remez and sod both mean secret.
Sure. So good. So the pshat, like you said, is really, it's when you read it like vashteta, what does it say? What does it mean in the most literal way, in the most obvious way, without much deep thought? The remez is, I translated it as an illusion, not with an I, but with an A. Like, what is this like hinting at? And I think what's helpful in thinking about this, again, is the frame of relationship, that if a person has a good friend, has a family member, has a partner, a person can say a little bit and communicate a lot. The more you know a person, the more you're familiar with them, the more you know what this is a reference to. So the more familiar we are with the Torah as a whole, as a body, the more that we can recognize like, oh, I know this word. Where does this word first come up? Where else is this word used? What are kind of the connotations of this word? You know, we have a lot of different words for very similar things in Judaism that speak about love and relationships and God. So why is this word being deployed? So the word remez is really like, it's a hint. It's a hint to something. It's if the person was reading it right out loud or saying it, there might be like a wink, a nod. Like there's an acknowledgement that this is speaking to something greater. But if you're not in the know, you don't know the reference, so then it's not going to be helpful. And so that's already when we think about things being hidden, there are two ways in which something is hidden. There's something can be hidden in a bulky way where a person's wearing a coat and there's a bulge. So a person knows that there's something underneath the coat, but you don't know what it is because it's concealed, but it's obvious because there's something that's out of place. And there's another way that something can be concealed, like it's concealed enough, the fabric itself is what's being, transported. But because it doesn't stick out, you don't even see it. I think that's the difference between the remez and the seid, that they're both hints.
Rabbi Moskowitz, the Wikipedia article, which I sent to Harold, and I think he's shared with everybody, does a very good job. And Rabbi Moskowitz, I wonder if you would walk us through of showing in Bereshit Aleph in Genesis 1:1.
Yeah.
He goes through, Rashi goes through the Pshat, and then the Vilna Gaon shows us the remez. And I think this is a great example using a text. So if we can go to page, I think it's page 3 where it says examples.
There's a very famous story with the Vilna Gaon where somebody at somebody's at a Pidyon Ben, and somebody comes up to the redemption of the firstborn and says to Vilna Gaon, is it really true that every single mitzvah in the Torah is alluded to in the word Bereshit? Bereshit.
Yeah. So hold it right there. This is perfect.
So this is that story, yeah?
Exactly.
So I didn't see this, but I mean, it's a famous story. Okay, so in Hebrew, it's Ben Rishon Acher Shloshim Yom Tifteh, that the firstborn son after 30 days should be redeemed. And the word Bereshis is in an acronym, right?
But hold on just a second before, go to starting with Pshat.
Sure.
So you see the way, this is a great example because this question of the word Bereshit is a little problematic as a word. And what we've been learning in Psalms is that often the rabbis go for the problems and try and understand what's the issue and then what's their resolution. So Rashi is saying here that and he says, what's the Pshat of this word Bereshit?
Yeah.
And he uses, according to the Pshat, it's the beginning of what? It says in the beginning of what? Because of the structure of the word Bereshit.
Yes.
Otherwise, it would say Berishona or Berishon. Rashi's responding to the fact that the word itself is a little weird. And he's saying it's the beginning of, and Rashi says, the Pshat is in the beginning of the creation. Yes. So that's Rashi's just doing the understanding the word Bereshit.
Yeah.
That would be, go ahead.
Yeah. No. And the truth is that, and the truth is that, that even the translation is bad because there's no prefix hey for the article the. It's not the beginning, it's a beginning. So everybody, in other words, has read this verse and the world is familiar with it, and it reads as a verse, right? In the beginning, God created, or of God's creation. So the pshat is that God created this world, right? Something out of nothing. So when you go a little bit closer to the text, you read it and it doesn't read so well. It's not ambiguous in that, like, we know what it means. We're just like bothered by an aspect of it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
Rashi's just trying to deal with a simple level. What do the words mean? This is a very good example.
That's right.
And then the remez, let's just do the first remez, which is exactly the Vilna Gaon here.
Right.
And he even uses the word hinting. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So the Vilna Gaon here, the Vilna Gaon very famously says, and if you're interested, the Chidah actually gives hundreds of examples of this, but that the first word really includes all of the commandments, that it's hinting to them. And also, I believe, there's 6 letters, and so you can rearrange those 6 letters in all sorts of ways to create allusions to things. But here the remez is that the commandment of Pidyon Ben is hinted at the phrase Ben Rishon Achrei Shlishim Yom Tifteh. So that the first letter of each of those words spells the word Bereshis. And this is known as Rashi Tevis. Rashi Tevis is the first of the letters of the words.
Like an acronym.
It's an acronym. And just as a kind of a, right. Okay, good. So so that's.
Then go down to let's go to the drasha, or the drash
Sure.
here, which they have.
Yeah, so the drasha is,
example, on the same verse. It's all staying on the same verse.
Yeah. So Rashi, right, comments that the Hebrew word Bereshis in the beginning can be homiletically understood as due to the first, right? Like Bishvil Rashis, with the intention of the first, which is the Jewish people. Thus, one may say that the world was created for the sake of the Torah and the Jewish people. And that's the drasha, meaning, is that what it says? That's not what it says. But is that there? That is absolutely there, because you can parse the word in such a way that like you're expounding, right? And it doesn't take away from the pshat. Bereshis means in a beginning, but it's actually the beginning of the Jewish people. It's the beginning of humanity, because you can't have people without a world. So it's not in contradiction, but it's also not what it says. But it's also not what it. But it's not what it says, right? It's there. It's just it's a drasha. And then the side here, I'm not sure how they're getting this from the word, but just maybe another example is in this verse. I mean, there's a lot of secrets here, but Bereshis bara Elokim es, that one way to kind of part the word es, aleph taf, the fourth word of this verse, we don't really translate it into English, but et is also the first and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Right. So the mystics understand that the first thing that God needed to create was the Hebrew alphabet, because you can't create the world through speech, let there be light, if there isn't a way to say, let there be light. So Bereshis bara Elokim es, that in the beginning, God created the aleph and the taf, the Hebrew alphabet, the first and the last letter and everything in between. So again, that's something that's not...
We could take this down now, Harold. Thank you.
Yeah. So the word et there is not, it's not odd, it's not awkward. And so often it's the mystical which are the most revealed. There's something actually deep in a Kabbalistic space that that the best way to hide something is in plain sight.
So the question was asked, Rabbi Moskowitz, when we first encountered this, why an orchard is the image and not something like a deep, complicated forest that's more full of secrets? An orchard seems not full of secrets.
Yeah, so I mean, part of it is that it's meant to be intimate. People take romantic walks through the orchard, right? It's not meant to be scary. There's something that's meant to be beautiful. It's often the ways in which the different plants and the trees complement each other in terms of their placement, in terms of the strategy of what, in terms of the landscaping. The other is that in Shir Shirim, in the Song of Songs, it's very specifically the orchard of pomegranates. And like Pardes Rimonim, it's one of the Ramak of Moshe Cordovero, one of the big famous mystics out of Sfas, has the name of his important book is Pardes Rimonim. And the Rimon, we're told, the pomegranate holds 613 seeds. And so it's kind of like it's an invitation to understand that what you see on the outside is beautiful, but it's actually just the shell. It's just the klipa. That which is contained inside is really what's valuable, and not just that it's valuable, but it speaks to being able to hold the totality in terms of its individuality. Each one of the seeds is a different commandment, and so it's an invitation to look deeper and to recognize the uniqueness of all of the things. And when it says Arba Nichnasu Pardes, when you have the four rabbis who go into the Pardes, Rabbi Akiva, Ben Zoma, Ben Azai, Acher. So Rabbi Akiva is the only one who goes in and comes out okay. One dies, one becomes a heretic, one becomes mad. And the language is that, he was nichnas b'shalom and he came out b'shalom. Shalom means in peace, but also shalom means whole. And so, and so the idea is that depending on who a person is in terms of their own development, they become the receptacle to be able to hold the divine goodness. Moses was the humblest of all people, was able to hold the most Torah. And so part of the journey into the parties in the world of ideas it's meant to be reciprocal, right? It gives back to a person when a person is exposed, whether it's, God forbid, a traumatic event or something. What do you do with that, right? How has the information, we're meant to be Talmidei Chacham, practitioners of the wisdom. So that's part of the journeying and the walking.
So unfortunately, we're about to run out of time. Harold and I both posted, Rabbi Moskowitz writes regularly about graceful masculinity on the Parsha each week. And his writing for this week's Parsha happens to deal with the Pardes itself. So we just posted that, and I encourage people to get it. And I know some of this probably went over some folks' heads, but it's really good to be exposed to it. Don't worry about that. The most important thing to come to this is to understand how deep the orchard is. And we all want to think about our study taking us from level to level to level. And the deepest, and I consider it really an avera, really a real transgression of the liberal Jewish world, is to present Judaism as if it remains on a pshat level all the time. And Judaism does not. Judaism, and we talked about this yesterday, how some people in the class were drawn to other religious traditions because the experience of Judaism is that it was thin and pale and lacked depth. And it's just not true. It's just we've been, because of various things, denied access. And it takes, and this class has been a fantastic example of people being willing to take on the work that it takes to begin to have some access. And so we go through these 4 different levels when we approach a psalm as well. And sometimes we don't get beyond the pshat. That's okay too. Sometimes the pshat is where you have to stay for a long time. And there's even a tradition that just on the level of study, how far you have to get before you can really go into the, and that's the whole story of the 4 who went into the Pardes and only one, only one emerged whole. By the way, there's a very famous book in English about those 4 rabbis, and I've forgotten the name of the book. Oh God.
As a Driven Leaf?
As a Driven Leaf. Thank you, Cantor Nimi. As a Driven Leaf, which focuses a bit on Acher, as Rabbi Moskowitz called him, Elisha ben Abuya, the one who became a heretic. And it's a fun book to read. But thank you. Oh my God, Cantor Nimi, you got right into my brain there. That's from the 50s. It's written by a very famous, I think, conservative rabbi.
Yes.
Right?
Milton Steinberg.
Milton Steinberg. Oh my God, this is teaching by class. Thank you, everybody. Milton Steinberg, who is not a novelist, but he wrote kind of a fictionalized tale of the story. This is that Rabbi Moskowitz referred to, super, super famous, of the 4 rabbis who went into the orchard together and only one emerged whole. Really fantastic Talmud piece. So thank you, Rabbi Moskowitz. And for those, please look for him every morning, 8:30. He's teaching a Talmud class also that's closed, that's only open to people who are on a level to begin studying in intensive nature, but he'll be teaching other classes for folks to explore text with him. We are so lucky to have you, Rabbi Moskowitz. And I consider it one of my greatest gifts to CBST to get you to be part of our community. And Harold was with me when we first met Rabbi Moskowitz, when we got arrested together in Washington, D.C., protesting Trump's anti-immigrant policies. All right, everybody. So do we have is Ira leading us out?
You know what, I think given the time, okay. Ira had suggested that he'll post today's and he will save the play out for next week. And we will do that. To remind everybody that Rabbi Kleinbaum will not be in the class tomorrow, so we can wear our pajamas and our fuzzy slippers, and we will be doing the Chavruta. So please print out your Psalm 17 so everybody has the same translation, and we'll be doing Chavruta with out in the groups, and then a little bit of report out. There is no class on Monday, thanks to President's Day. Rabbi Moskowitz, thank you so much for joining us. It really opens a window into someplace. Rabbi Moskowitz says he knows he speaks fast, that the best advice that he got from someone, he was down south and they said, we know we can't make you speak any slower. Could you just put some pauses in so we can catch up? But
just listen faster. That's better.
Listen, I can't talk slower. Why don't you listen faster? All right. So wonderful class. Thank you so much, Ira. Thank you. We look forward to hearing more about Arvo Pärt, one of my favorite composers, next week. And there'll be a lot going into Facebook. And
join Rabbi Moskowitz every morning at 8:30, or during the day you can get the recording.
Just go to the Facebook, the CBS. I posted it, the CBS.
Oh, great. Facebook Thank you, Harold.
The videos, and they're all archived right there on the Facebook page. And everyone, it's bright and sunny outside. As your mother would say, get outside a little. Some fresh air would be good for you. Get away from the screen and just enjoy the sunlight, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, Rabbi Moskowitz.
Harold, it's 3 degrees in Wisconsin.
You shouldn't go out, all right? Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
3 3 degrees.
Oh.